All right, so President Joseph Robinette Biden obviously recently announced that he is in fact going to be running for re-election in 2024, even though it seems like, according to the polling data, the overwhelming majority of not only the American people, but also specifically Democrats, don't want this guy to run again in 2024. Now, don't get me wrong, the same exact concept applies to Republicans. The overwhelming majority of Americans don't want Trump to run in 2024, and yet it seems like that's the matchup that we're going to get stuck with once again as the rematch that absolutely nobody wanted to see. But that's the reality that we are living with right now. Obviously, we have Marianne Williamson, we have RFK Jr., some people who have thrown their hat in the ring to potentially challenge Joe Biden, but there has been a massive pushback to that. There has been a massive sort of mainstream media blackout. There's been a push from the politicians within the Democratic Party. Even Bernie Sanders came out and gave an early endorsement to Joe Biden, which is disappointing for so many different reasons. But I got a couple different things here that I wanted to show you guys just about like the dangers of Joe Biden running again in 2024, given the current electoral makeup, especially with the sort of constituency that won him the election in 2020 and also helped Democrats in 2022 to hold on to the Senate and keep a close majority within the House of Representatives. So here we have from Mediaite here pointed out, we have an interview from ABC where they are essentially going around and they're asking young people on this college campus, what do you think about Joe Biden announcing for re-election? Are you excited about it? Are you disappointed with it? Are you neutral about it? And I think that this one clip here pretty much sums up the entire situation and basically what is Joe Biden's core campaign strategy. Okay, so let's just watch this short clip here.
This week, were you excited by that?
Not particularly. I'm more interested in a progressive candidate.
Despite having voted for Biden last time, 21-year-old Elena Symes couldn't point me to anything that would make her want to vote for him again, except...
What do you like about Joe Biden?
That he's not Trump.
The hesitation.
Okay, so that's it. And listen, that answer that she just gave is pretty much the majority of Biden's strategy for 2024. I'm not even kidding. That's what they've openly been saying behind the scenes and also in their public appearances as well. They just think that not being Donald Trump or not being Ron DeSantis and not being as openly authoritarian and all of that good stuff, that is just going to be enough for them to win in 2024 once again. Okay, now there's a lot of polling data, again, that indicates that might not be the case. There have been plenty of polls that have come out that have shown a neck-and-neck race between Trump and Biden. Now, he might be able to win in 2024 if Trump is his matchup, but, like, what does that say about American democracy, where we are pretty much inevitably going to end up with, outside of some sort of a miracle from Marianne Williamson, we are pretty much almost guaranteed to end up with a matchup that nobody wants. Nobody wants to see Joe Biden versus Donald Trump again. Okay, the overwhelming majority of the American people would want two other candidates in each political party, and yet that's who we're going to get stuck with. I mean, what does that say about our so-called democracy or just our political system broadly, where these sort of entrenched powers can just continue pushing forward, just completely regardless of what the actual American people want to see from our so-called democracy? Now, there was a great write-up here by David Sirota where he was basically explaining some of the flaws with Joe Biden's 2024 run. So I wanted to get into some of the takes that he had here because I think he's absolutely right on many different things. So here from The Guardian, he wrote an op-ed. He says the Democrats think that centrism will re-elect Biden. That's a dangerous assumption. Yeah, correct. So he says the Democratic Party's political class has developed a formula over the last decade. Ignore rather than channel discontent among the party's rank-and-file voters, prevent competitive primaries where those voters can act on their dissatisfaction, and then hope to eke out a general election victory on a wave of voter disgust with the Republican Party's outlandish nominees. So basically, in a condensed form, they're using this strategy of just saying, I'm not as bad as the other guy, right? You might think that I haven't done enough. You might think that I've been terrible on some issues, but at least I'm not Donald Trump. I mean, that's literally what this girl in that clip just now was saying, right? I mean, that's the Reliant strategy that Democrats are pushing for in 2024. And listen, I mean, there's one side of this and then another side of this. The first side of this, which I think he's absolutely correct upon, is that, Democrats are not utilizing a lot of this energy energy that especially young people have towards bigger, actual true structural change to our political system, to our economic system, and all of that, they could be weaponizing that in the same way that Bernie Sanders did in his 2016 and his 2020 runs in order to harness that energy and actually push it towards the electoral realm and, prove that you are able or capable of, using that sort of an agenda in order to materially improve people's lives. That's sort of one aspect of it, is that they're not using that political energy. But then there's also another aspect of it, which is that, you see here, I mean, Democrats, they're not even willing to engage with debates with other candidates, right? Like RFK or Marianne Williamson, who you could have plenty of criticisms of either of them, but they're not even willing to entertain this idea of having a conversation at the same time that they are always also trying to claim that they are the so-called vanguard protectors of democracy, right? How are you going to claim that Republicans are a threat to democracy, which is something that I actually agree with, right? But how are you going to claim that while simultaneously not even having a legitimate primary? I mean, it wasn't even just the not hosting of debates, but it was also shifting the primary calendar and all of that, which he gets into in this article. But another thing here is, just relying on the fact that Republicans are absolutely atrocious. Well, do you think that that's going to be enough in this kind of an election atmosphere, or the atmosphere of this country? I mean, you sort of build up to the point where inevitably you're going to get to the point where, the overwhelming majority of the American people feel so dejected, feel so detached from the political process being able to deliver on actually improving their lives, that they are going to be more susceptible to right-wing authoritarians or to anti-democratic, Republicans, or to people who are fake right-wing populists of sorts, right? If you are not delivering on a true left-wing economic populist agenda, then you are going to leave, millions and millions of people across the country more open to falling for some of the lines of somebody like Donald Trump, right? Who was railing against NAFTA. He was railing against the Iraq War. He was railing against, the mistreatment, the abandonment of the, working people within the United States. They're obviously fake narratives that the right is pulling up, because obviously they all agree with the agenda of corporate America, the billionaire class, and all of that stuff. That was the main, achievement of the Trump administration, was delivering a tax cut that, disproportionately went to the millionaire and billionaire class and corporations within this country. But that stuff doesn't matter if the other side, the Democrats, are not actually delivering on a true economic populist agenda. Okay, so that's kind of the lesson that I took from that. But he continues down here. He says, now Democrats seem intent on using the formula again, only this time it's even more risky because this is not a race against a sitting Republican president. In 2024, Biden is the incumbent playing defense, and data suggests that there's not much enthusiasm for his re-election campaign, even amongst his own party. True, again, not just the overwhelming majority of the American people don't want him to run again, it's the majority of Democrats that don't want him to run again, and yet we have an media ecosystem here in the United States within corporate media that is basically just pretending as if none of his challengers are legitimate challengers, or that they even are worthy of a discussion or a debate or anything like that, which is ironic because after smearing these people, after basically doing a blackout on any of his challengers like Marianne or RFK Jr., they then turn around and they print articles, as he's going to point out in this one here, where they'll basically say oh, Democrats don't like Joe Biden, but they don't see any alternatives. And it's well, you guys are not educating people, which is your fucking job. You're not telling people about the actual alternatives and what their policy disagreements are with the Biden administration. So it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy going on here. It's just a circle of a cycle of sort of the same thing that is then feeding into the narrative that they are trying to push at the outset of it. But they continue here saying that a stat from the Washington Post illustrates this problem, saying Biden has less support for renomination among Democrats than Trump, Obama, and Clinton had from their parties. The newspaper reports, noting that surveys show just 38% of Democrats want Biden to be the party's nominee in 2024. 38%. That's almost a third of Democrats are happy with Joe Biden being the nominee in 2024. And again, you have the overwhelming majority of our political establishment and media that are pretending as if that's inevitable, or that it has to be inevitable. There's no other potential choice that's going on here, right? And one other thing that I would note is that even just having Kamala Harris as your vice president, that is a hindrance to Biden's re-election campaign, okay? Having the prospects of somebody like Joe Biden, who is about 1 billion years old at this point, and according to the actuarial tables, could drop dead on any given day in a realistic scenario, highly doubt that he's going to be able to make it through the next full term, being fully cognitively aware of what's going on and physically healthy and all of that stuff. Having Kamala Harris be the next in line if you were to have some sort of health complication or to die or something like that, that is going to drag you down in the polls as well, which also just kind of gets back to like the complete incompetence of Democrats' strategy in terms of who he chose as his vice president, somebody who is somehow even less popular than Joe Biden himself is. But he continues here, David does, saying if there was a healthy, genuine democratic culture among the Democratic Party's political class, the response to the prospect of depressed voter enthusiasm might be a serious primary challenge. There might be a traditional top-tier candidate, maybe a senator, a governor, or even a member of the House, who is both ambitious enough to run for president and worried enough about a Biden failure in the general election against Trump. Doesn't look like we're going to get anybody like that. There are no senators, there are no members of the House, there are no, other primary, political actors that are willing to step in to challenge Biden right now, but he says such a primary would serve the additional benefit of testing Biden's own re-election viability and making sure that he can handle the rigors of the campaign before he's already the nominee. And I mean, keep in mind, the reason why Joe Biden waited this long to announce his candidacy for 2024, even after Marianne Williamson announced her candidacy to challenge him, the reason he waited that long is specifically because a lot of the people who are around him in his inner circles don't think that he is physically or mentally capable of actually waging this kind of a campaign at full scale. I mean, he got lucky back in 2020. Keep in mind, the reason why Joe Biden was able to sort of like hide behind the scenes and not give a bunch of interviews and appearances and debates and all of that was because of COVID, okay? He got very lucky with the happenstance of COVID emerging during that primary and during the general election, where he could just make the excuse of, I just have to be at home, right, for my own personal safety, right? I mean, that was a very lucky situation for him relatively to ensure that he didn't have to actually face a lot of scrutiny. And if you look at the data on this, there have been recent reports that have come out showing that Joe Biden has done less interviews with the press. Okay, he's made less public appearances and speeches than almost any president in modern American history. So he's clearly, it's very much up in the air in terms of whether or not he actually has the physical or mental ability to do an entire, election campaign again, or to go through that debate process, or especially with a difficult primary. I mean, it's questionable whether or not he would even be able to make it through that. But I want to finish off here with some other stuff that David Sirota said. So he says, after a very good American Rescue Plan. Okay, so he's going to give a little bit of credit here to Joe Biden for the American Rescue Plan. I would also tack on to this, right, because he points out that this has helped millions of people and boosted Biden's standing among voters. Then he gets into some of the criticisms of Joe Biden. I mean, I would add, if I'm going to be very generous and fair to Joe Biden, in terms of what he has accomplished throughout his administration, that would be somewhat motivating for me, at least, to give him another chance, right? You could talk about things like the leaving of Afghanistan, right? Ending the Afghanistan war. That was a good move. He got shit on by the media for that. I'm 100% in support of that, right? You could have criticisms of how it went down or whatever the case may be, but he did that, okay? He actually ended the war in Afghanistan, at least the boots on the ground troops that the United States had there, right? There's a couple other things, right? I mean, you could talk about, some of the other different various bipartisan bills that he's put forward. I would have many, many critiques that I've outlined thoroughly on this channel about the shortcomings of many of those bills, but there are some things that he's done that he could potentially run on in 2024. Now, we watched his re-election, basically launch off video that he put out on Twitter, and he didn't mention any of the things that he's done, right? He didn't talk about infrastructure spending. He didn't talk about climate change. He didn't talk about really abortion rights that much in terms of what he could do to actually protect abortion rights with this ongoing right-wing assault against them, right? He didn't actually talk about like any of his real accomplishments. He was just kind of being vague and like virtue signaling on certain topics and saying like, we need to get the job done, without actually saying or describing in detail what the job he's trying to get done actually is. So, I mean, again, it seems like he's had some marginal, pieces of legislation that he could tout. Is he even going to be able to effectively tout those in a general or a primary election campaign? Yet to be seen. But as he points out here, there's a lot of reasons to also be upset with Joe Biden, right? Which is why I gave that sort of prelude there. But They say that after they passed the American Rescue Plan, which dramatically slashed poverty in a number of different ways, they say that Democrats cut off the pandemic aid, they jacked up taxes on the working class, they stomped out a rail strike, which is one of the most egregious anti-labor things that Joe Biden has done, this supposed most pro-labor president in American history, which is just absolute nonsense. You can't stand in and prevent a strike from taking place when they're asking for just, like sick days and paid sick leave and, some of the bare minimum there that they actually deserve, and stomp out that strike and then pretend to be pro-union and pro-labor. You also haven't passed the PRO Act or anything remotely resembling that, so that was an absolutely atrocious thing that he did. But they say that they also have expanded fossil fuel drilling amid the climate emergency, demagogued the crime issue, and reappointed Trump's worker-crushing Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who has been jacking up interest rates specifically with the intention of throwing millions of people out of work in order to somehow solve the inflation crisis that has been disproportionately, a majority of it, driven by corporate greed and corporate profits. But they say that he also has abandoned his minimum wage and healthcare promises that they made in 2020. And they also, of course, bailed out the Silicon Valley Bank SVB tech moguls, while the government moved to force up to 15 million people off of Medicaid. Okay, so, I mean, listen, that's the reality of the Biden administration. Again, you could maybe come up with a list of solid things, semi-solid things that he's done throughout his presidency, but is it enough? No, it's fucking not. It's definitely not enough for younger people like myself or younger generations who actually understand how this system has been screwing over ourselves and older people as well for decades and decades and decades in this country. We want systemic change. We want structural change. We don't want crumbs on the side. We don't want milquetoast sort of like half-assed, bipartisan responses to these types of situations. We want sort of an FDR 2.0 as a president, okay, which is something that Biden has pretended to be. He's not. He's nowhere even remotely close to that, but that's what I think young people would actually thrive around, would actually get motivated for, would get excited about, would be like an FDR 2.0 minus the racism, minus the xenophobia and all of that good stuff, right? So that's what I think that Biden should be striving for. Is he striving for that? No, absolutely not. I mean, again, he let the $15 minimum wage get killed. He's kicking millions of people off of Medicaid. I mean, so many different things where you could critique the Biden administration for either being terrible on or being like not remotely good enough on. And yet, what is their strategy? Is their strategy to actually come forward and address those issues and tell people their strategy for getting those kinds of things implemented within the United States? No. You know what their actual strategy is? It's basically trying to push for young guys like this guy, okay? We got Harry Sison and Chris Mowry, who are basically, I guess, like not directly working for the DNC or the Democratic Party, but sort of like in a tangential way, sort of getting paid by an outside organization who maybe gets some funding from the Democratic Party, the DNC, whatever. They have some affiliation to the Democratic Party, and they are trying to do propaganda for young people to convince them that Biden is the main choice. Let's go ahead and see how this is going here. We got this first one from Harry Sison here.
The choice for the 2024 presidential election is already clear. We have President Biden, who's a good man. He's passed historic policy, and he cares about the American people. But what do the Republicans have? Donald Trump, the disgraced, twice impeached former president, who's been indicted. He tried to incite an insurrection at our Capitol. He tried to overturn a free and fair election. Yeah, let's stick with common sense and not conspiracy. Let's stick with fact and not fiction. And in 2024, we're going to re-elect President Biden, and we're going to finish the job.
Okay. All right, so first of all, this is gonna give me nightmares later because I sort of almost see a version of myself in these couple of guys who have been doing these videos, which is very alarming and terrifying to me. Is that if I had gone in like a slightly different course, and I didn't go sort of down this like left-wing like socialist rabbit hole that I did and end up educating myself in exactly the way that I did and formulating the opinions that I have right now, I could have maybe been one of these guys. Okay, so that to me, absolutely disturbing as a concept. But, other than that, I mean, first of all, calm down. Calm down, man. I mean, listen, I know that in my commentary, sometimes I get heated, but usually when I get heated and I'm passionately talking about something, it's because it's something like healthcare or, imperialism or something that like directly, is negatively impacting millions and millions of people's lives. This guy is getting amped to the absolute max about re-electing Joe Biden because he's so inspiring or Republicans are so bad. I mean, it's like, again, they don't seem to understand the core root of the problem here, which is not that, people don't understand, young people especially, that, Republicans are bad for the future, right? They're bad on climate change, they're bad on healthcare, they're bad on economics, they're bad on foreign policy especially, okay? So many different issues. I don't like the Republican Party, okay? Do you know how difficult it is to not inspire somebody like me to want to vote against the Republican Party, right? The issue here is not that people don't understand how bad Republicans are. The issue here is that Democrats are they're not presenting an adequate alternative to Republicans that is inspiring, okay? And so, that's kind of my main issue with these guys. But we have another one here that's lined up, and honestly, this one pissed me off even more than the first one. The first one was kind of, whatever. It's cringe, it's whatever. But this one actually kind of made me angry here. So let's listen to this guy. What's his name? Chris Mowry. All right, let's listen to what he has to say.
So a new NBC News poll shows that 70% of all Americans, including 51% of Democrats, don't want President Biden to run again.
It goes like this. Right now, there's 3 Democrats in the mix. Marianne Williamson, who's seen as very out there and fundamentally unserious, there's reports that she abuses her staff, and I know she says she wants free healthcare, free college for all, but when you ask her how she's going to achieve this, it's radio silence. Then we have a Kennedy in the mix who's backed by a bunch of Trumpers. He's a conspiracy theorist.
Okay, I gotta pause it there. I can't take any more of this. Again, first of all, calm the fuck down, okay? Calm down. You don't need to be screaming in your bathroom, all right, leaning on the counter, recording some fucking vertical iPhone video in the mirror. Okay, calm down, first of all. Second of all, okay, he showed polling data at the beginning of this video. What was it? 70% of all Americans, including 51% of Democrats, a majority, don't want Biden to run again. Okay, so instead of looking at that data and thinking maybe let's do a little bit of an analysis here. Why are people not excited about Joe Biden? Could it be that he's had some failings on some issues that he promised in the 2020 campaign, hasn't delivered on? Could it be that people want more structural change? They would be more motivated if some candidate was to actually more aggressively not only confront Republicans and their agenda, but to push forward with a left-wing populist economic agenda? Could that be the reason? No. The reason why we shouldn't even consider or talk about these polls, apparently in this guy's opinion, is because what? Because RFK Jr. is a joke? Okay, fine, I have many disagreements with him on certain policy issues, but with the Marianne Williamson commentary, okay, let's slow down. Let's analyze what he just said there, okay? He had basically 3 different core criticisms of Marianne Williamson's campaign. The first one is that she's seen as an outsider or seen as sort of fringe, I guess. Okay, I mean, what do you have a specific critique of Marianne or any of the policies that she's run on or anything like that? I mean, it's just oh, she's kind of wacko, and then you're just gonna leave it at that and just move on, okay? Not even entertaining any of the actual substance on that issue. Another thing that he brought up there is, he talks about at the end that, Marianne Williamson is somebody who has had allegations of some sort of an abusive relationship with her staff, which she's adamantly denied in other interviews, and we don't really know the backstory of that, where this came from. Was it just a hit piece? Is this real? What's actually going on there, right? So he brings up those 2 things, and then the last thing that he talks about is that, okay, she runs on things that are wildly popular amongst young people, things like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, etc. But when you ask her how she's gonna get it done, she don't have any answer, okay? That's what he's talking about here. Okay, the same shit that we heard about Bernie Sanders, even though he outlined explicitly, here's how I'm going to so-called pay for every single policy that's within my agenda. Here's how we're going to get it done, by mobilizing and equipping a broad coalition of working class Americans in order to get out into the streets, in order to lobby their own members of Congress, in order to put maximum pressure on against our corrupt political system in order to try to get these policies done. He just summarizes that as though, number 1, Marianne Williamson is not serious, okay? Number 2, she's seen as sort of a fringe outsider who's kind of wacko, kind of crazy. And number 3, maybe she has popular policies, but she doesn't know how to get them done, okay? And then you contrast that with what Joe Biden has done. I mean, Joe Biden ran on the public option, for example, right? He said, Bernie Sanders Medicare for all, that might be good as an ideal to strive for at some point in the future, but it's not realistic, right? We can't get this done. Okay, while he's simultaneously behind closed doors, he's accepting, money from the health insurance lobbyists and corporations and all of that stuff. But put that aside, he said, I have the public option. The public option is going to be so easy to pass, or it'll be infinitely easier than Medicare for all. We're going to get that done. That's the reasonable centrist alternative. Has Joe Biden gotten the public option done? No. Not only has he not gotten it done, he hasn't even talked about it. He has not mentioned the public option, at least as far as I've seen. Okay, and I've been keeping my eye on these things, right? I have not seen him mention the public option one time since he's been elected. Okay, so that's just a summarization of who Joe Biden is as a candidate. Okay, a centrist, milquetoast, pathetic corporate Democrat. Okay, who obviously the overwhelming majority of the American people are not satisfied with. So the idea that like this is his strategy moving forward, this is the strategy for Democrats in 2024 is literally going to be, we are not as bad as Republicans, okay? We maybe got some milquetoast reforms here and there, some bipartisan efforts that have been pushed through that aren't even remotely close to what the broad consensus of the American people actually want out of our elected representatives, out of Congress, out of the House, out of the Senate, out of the presidency, all of that stuff. We're just going to sort of brush that concern aside and just hope that in 2024, people are so disgusted with Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or whoever the nominee has to be that, we are going to end up winning that election. Good fucking luck with that.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying